Our shy girl, careful with every penny, suddenly pays for a stranger's coffee, unaware he's a millionaire. Weeks later, he invites her to his company headquarters with an offer that could change her life forever. Because sometimes, a miracle begins with a quiet act of kindness no one sees. Have you ever done something good and forgotten it? And if that day turned out to be the turning point you never saw coming, what would happen next? There are gestures in life so small we never bother to remember them. A quick nod, a forgotten sticky note, half a bus ticket shared with a stranger, or buying someone's coffee just because he forgot his wallet. That morning, the sky was draped in grey, rain falling in fine, whispering threads against the familiar cityscape. On a quiet corner beneath waterlogged trees sat a small cafe, still and tucked into the rhythm of the street. She stepped in, her dark sweater damp at the shoulders, long hair slightly tangled, arms wrapped around a worn canvas bag pressed to her chest as if by instinct. A final-year university student, she juggled internships in the morning, classes in the afternoon, part-time jobs at night. Every dollar she spent was carefully weighed, every cup of coffee a small deliberate indulgence. But that morning, she felt the need for something warm, not to wake her up, but to remind herself she was still alive in a world that sometimes felt cold to the touch. She stood in line behind a tall man, lean though not thin, and paid him little attention until it was his turn. He wore a pale blue shirt and simple slacks, a leather briefcase frayed at the edges in one hand. There was something quiet about him, the kind of quiet that settles into someone who's lived long enough to prefer silence over explanation. When the cashier announced the total, he checked his pockets, first left, then right. His hand froze briefly. "Sorry, I think I left my wallet in the car. Can you hold the order for 5 minutes?" he asked softly. The cashier hesitated. The line behind him began to stir. Someone sighed audibly. No one said a word, but the air filled with that silent tension. How quickly inconvenience can turn a person into a problem. She looked down at the crumpled $10 bill in her hand. Her coffee was $3, his was $4.75. Without thinking, she spoke, her voice low but clear. "I can cover his." The cashier paused. So did the man. He turned to look at her, surprised, not by the offer but by the calm in her voice. There was no awkwardness, no expectation. "Really?" he asked, as if raising his voice might break the spell. She nodded, placed the money on the counter, took her own coffee, and left without waiting for thanks or a second glance. Outside, the rain continued its quiet descent. She pulled her sweater closer and walked briskly, not out of embarrassment, but because attention made her uneasy. To her, kindness didn't need acknowledgement. She simply thought, if her mother ever forgot her wallet in a strange city, someone might do the same for her. Inside the cafe, the man stood still for a moment longer. His coffee sat untouched on the counter. He held his phone tightly in one hand, eyes following the small figure slipping out the door. Then slowly, he opened his payment app, looked at the receipt. One name stood out. Paid by Mia L. He saved it. Said nothing. Anne typed a note to himself. Kind stranger, Monday, 7:42 a.m. That night she returned to the dorm, shed her wet clothes, dried her hair with a thinning towel, then sat before her laptop, its screen glowing softly with the title of her final thesis, The Impact of Unconditional Kindness During Times of Crisis. It wasn't a popular topic, but she chose it because she believed even in the hardest moments, what held people together were the quiet acts no one ever mentioned. 3 days passed. A car pulled up outside the old cafe. The man stepped out, this time in a dark suit, his gaze sharper now. A younger assistant followed with a tablet in hand. He paused, eyes lingering on the weathered sign above the door. "She came in here once," he said slowly. "Help me find her." The assistant didn't ask. "Why?" He simply nodded and began typing. 1 week later, on a morning heavy with low clouds, she stood waiting at the bus stop near campus. She opened her phone. A new email blinked on the screen. Interview invitation. Global Nova Tech Inc. She blinked. A soft breeze brushed the back of her neck, tinged with autumn's first chill. Her hands clenched slightly, eyes locked on the subject line. She didn't believe it, didn't understand it. She had never applied, never dreamed. Big enough to imagine herself at a tech giant like that. She looked up. The city was the same, grey, damp still. Only her heartbeat had changed. Not from fear, but from something opening, something that felt both strange and familiar. And maybe, deep down, you've had a moment like that too, when a small thing you once did found its way back, without warning. That morning held nothing special, just a faint light seeping through thick grey clouds and the steady hum of traffic outside. In a small room, she woke when her alarm rang for the second time. As always, she reached out to silence it, slowly pulled the blanket aside and sat up. But unlike most mornings, she didn't rush to wash her face or make coffee. Instead, she looked at her phone, something she usually only glanced at in passing before heading out. There it was. A new email, sent from a name she never imagined would appear in her inbox. Global Nova Tech Inc. The subject line was simple. Interview invitation, Global Nova Tech. She tapped it open, eyes scanning each line as if they belonged to someone else. Date, time, contact person. And at the very end, your information was referred through our internal system. She froze. Global Nova, familiar from lectures, from dissected case studies in class. A prestigious tech firm with a recruitment process so airtight it barely made space for undergrads, let alone someone like her. She had never submitted an application, never filled out a form, never even clicked on one of their job listings. She stepped back, set the phone down like it had burned her. Inside her something stirred, part confusion, part suspicion, and yet there was a glimmer, as if something improbable had just nudged its way into the room. She thought of that rainy morning, the cafe, the man, the receipt with her name on it. She brushed the thought aside. It was ridiculous. No one gets an interview at a company like Global Nova just because they paid for someone's coffee. Or maybe someone might, but not her. She took a screenshot and sent it to her best friend along with a short question. Should I go? The reply came in under a minute. Go. Don't ask. Don't think. Just go. She spent the rest of the morning thinking, not about what to wear or what to say, but about whether it could all be a mistake. What if she got there? And they said, sorry, you're not on the list. But if she didn't go, she would never know what might have happened. And in this world, not knowing could be scarier than failing. 3 days later, on a still afternoon, she stepped off the bus in front of Global Nova's headquarters. It towered into the clouds, glass panels mirroring the moody sky. It wasn't. Just tall, it felt distant, unreachable. She swallowed hard and drew in a deep breath. In her pocket was the printed invitation from the night before, folded in half like a lucky charm. The receptionist greeted her kindly and scanned the QR code on her phone. She was directed to the 26th floor. Each second in the elevator seemed longer than the last, her heartbeat sinking with the numbers blinking upward on the panel. The 26th floor was flooded with natural light, gleaming wood floors, soft beige sofas. A few people sat waiting, but no one looked at her. She sat quietly. Then a door opened. A woman in a grey suit stepped out with a warm smile. Mia Lei? She stood. Inside the wide room, 4 people sat around a table. Sunlight poured through the large windows behind them. None of them looked familiar. No sign of the man from the cafe. She didn't know what she'd expected, but something in her fell slightly at the absence. The interview wasn't what she imagined. No questions about her GPA, no inquiries about her background. Instead, they asked how she viewed the world, how she handled unfairness if she'd ever done the right thing without a clear reason. She answered honestly, without trying to sound clever. Just herself, the way she had been when she paid for someone's coffee. Quiet, unadorned. When she stepped out of the building, the late-day sun stretched long across the street. She stood still for a moment, seeing the city from a new angle, higher, quieter, not because she'd been on the 26th floor, but because she'd stepped beyond a fear she had once built around herself. She didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time, something felt possible. Like the first crack of light slipping through the curtains after too many grey days. And maybe you've been there too, standing in front of a strange message, an unexpected chance. That moment of hesitation, of not knowing. And then, saying yes anyway. Maybe today is the day you press reply. That interview stayed with her, not because of the questions or the way the panel looked at her, but because of the feeling that she was a dim little light flickering inside a room flooded with brilliance. A faint, uncertain glow trying to survive in a place where everything else felt sharp, certain, and already arrived. She had come early, sitting quietly in the waiting area on the 26th floor, where wide windows opened to a still grey sky. The chairs were plush, expensive, but they made her feel like she was sitting somewhere she didn't belong. She clutched her bag tightly, shoes still a bit damp from the night's rain, her carefully ironed shirt still creased slightly at the sleeve. Then the others began to arrive. A blonde girl with curls and a pastel pink blazer, holding a full color presentation folder, chatted easily with the receptionist. A young man, Asian, dark suit, never looking up from his iPad as he flipped through slides. Someone else, tall, poised, joking with the security guard in fluent French. She didn't understand the words, but the rhythm of his voice made the people around him smile. No one looked at her, or if they did, it was only in passing. She sat there silent, trying to tell herself, I was invited. I have a reason to be here. But the more she looked around, the thicker the invisible wall between her and the others became. Not one they built, but one born of how differently they stepped into the room. They walked in like they were home. She wasn't sure she belonged anywhere at all. When it was her turn, she was led to a larger conference room. On the table sat a glass pitcher of lemon water and delicate drinking glasses. She took the center seat. Across from her, 4 interviewers, 2 men, 2 women. Their eyes weren't unfriendly, but they weren't soft either. The first woman smiled gently and began, We'd like to hear about a personal experience that made you believe you're a good fit for Global Nova's culture. A simple question, and yet her heart thudded hard. She had no slides, no personal brand strategy, no standout experience like the others probably did. She took a breath, steadying her voice. I used to work at a second-hand bookstore, she began, eyes resting on the table. Each week we were allowed to pick one damaged book to take home. I always chose the ones no one wanted, the ones with torn spines or yellowed pages. And I found that sometimes the imperfect ones held the most profound stories. Small hush fell across the room. The man on her right nodded, just barely, but the eyes of the man in the middle remained unreadable. He flipped through her file and asked, How do you think kindness fits into a competitive corporate environment like ours? She knew she could answer with something polished. It fosters sustainable culture and/or boosts team engagement. But what came out was the first truth that rose in her chest. I think kindness is how someone with nothing can still leave something behind. This time, the youngest woman on the panel softened a little, but the man in the center narrowed his gaze. So it sounds like you value emotion over performance? The pies. Question landed like an arrow. She didn't know if it was a trap. She wanted to defend herself, to say she could work hard, learn fast, adapt. But all of that, she knew, they'd already heard from a dozen other candidates. So she simply smiled faintly. I believe performance doesn't last without emotion. Silence followed, not uncomfortable but clear. The woman in grey scribbled something into her notes. The rest of the interview moved into more technical territory, crisis communication strategies, conflict resolution approaches. She answered. Some questions well stumbled through others. Nothing disastrous, but nothing dazzling either. When she stepped out of the room, the others had already left. She entered the elevator alone, hand still gripping her bag just as it had when she arrived. On the way home, she didn't check her phone, didn't think about the outcome. She just kept replaying that morning, how it had felt like speaking a different language in a room where everyone else already knew the script. And somewhere deep inside, A small voice whispered, "Maybe I'm not ready. Or maybe I'll never be enough by their standards." But she had shown up and spoken, even if her voice trembled, even if her heart faltered, and maybe, just maybe, that alone was something worth holding on to. When the elevator doors closed behind her, Mia told herself she wouldn't look back. The 26th floor, the meeting room, the sharp questions and scrutinizing eyes, all of it would be folded up like a quiet chapter, gently shut away. She expected nothing. Hoped for little, but there was something she hadn't yet understood. That sometimes what changes everything doesn't come from the perfect answer, but from the most unexpected glance. The next morning, her inbox held nothing new. No thank you note, no follow-up, no promises. She shut her laptop, made herself a coffee and sat by the window. She remembered how much she'd trembled, not because of the questions, but because of the feeling of being small in a room, lit entirely by other people's confidence, like she was attending a grand party in borrowed shoes. Then that afternoon, as she folded clothes after her shift at the bookstore, her phone buzzed. One new email, the subject line just a single, quiet sentence. "We invite you to the next interview round, Global Nova Tech." She stared at the words for a long time, unmoving. Around her, the rustle of plastic bags, the distant traffic, the wind slipping through the cracked door, all of it receded, making space for one silent question. Why? The second interview, she learned, would be with one of the senior directors. This time, the location wasn't the large, polished conference room on the 26th floor, but a smaller room at the end of a glass corridor, flooded with light from a high, vaulted ceiling. Mia arrived early. She sat alone in the quiet space, holding the documents she had prepared the night before. She wasn't shaking, but her heart was not at peace. Then the door opened, and for a moment time caught its breath. The man who walked in was none other than the one she had met on that rainy morning at the cafe. He wore a simple black suit, no tie, but his eyes, there was no mistaking them. That same gaze, startled and moved, gentle but searching. Mia froze. Her hand tightened around the strap of her bag resting on the chair beside her. He walked to the table without a word, pulled out the chair across from her and sat, opened the folder before him. The stillness between them was not heavy. It was the kind that settles between people who've already shared something that didn't need to be named. Finally, he looked up, their eyes meeting. "Mia, right?" She nodded. He folded his hands, leaning forward slightly. "Do you remember me?" The question didn't sound like a test. It sounded like confirmation that what she was thinking was true. She didn't answer right away. She looked into his eyes, and this time it wasn't the look of a man who had forgotten his wallet, but of someone who had seen in her something far beyond a simple act of kindness. "You're the man from the cafe," she whispered. He smiled, not broadly but with a warmth that settled in the space between them. "Thank you. I think I've owed you that for a while." Mia tilted her head slightly, unsure if he meant the thank you or something more. He opened the folder and slid a proposal across the table. "I'd like you to take a look at this content project. It's part of a campaign about human values, something I believe you understand deeply. No unnecessary words, no mention of the coffee, the rain, the forgotten wallet. But every glance, every pause, every quiet between his sentences carried the same message. You are not invisible. You were not chosen out of pity. You are here because you are worthy." Mia took the document. Her hands didn't tremble anymore. Only her heart felt full, brimmed with something hard to name, like a door had just opened, gently, without warning. The conversation wasn't long, but when she stepped out of that room, she knew something. Inside her had shifted. She walked slowly down the empty hallway, past the clear glass that overlooked the city. The sky was softening, grey giving way to pale gold, as if something old had just been unfastened. No one said it aloud, but she knew. That rainy morning hadn't been the end of a kind gesture. It had been the beginning of something far larger, a look, a nod. One person remembering a moment of decency and choosing to pass it on exactly where it was most needed. Not everyone gets to meet the person they once helped. But today, she had, and in doing so she had seen for herself. Sometimes the most beautiful things begin in moments where we expect nothing at all. She didn't remember how she left the Global Nova building. Everything after that conversation, the familiar face in the unfamiliar setting, blurred slightly, like a dream brushing too close to reality. Back home, she opened her bag and pulled out the folder he'd left her. Not to read, not yet, but simply to confirm that the interview had happened, that it hadn't all been in her head. The print was crisp, the strategy maps and content outlines clear and methodical. His name was real too, printed beneath, a title that suddenly felt impossibly large. Director of Strategic Communications, Global Nova Tech. She set the folder down and made herself a cup of tea. Not coffee. Tonight she needed something quieter, something that wouldn't make her heart beat any faster. Everything had changed, even if she didn't yet know where that change would lead. The next morning, a short email arrived. No elaborate subject line, no flourishes. Welcome to Global Nova, from Ethan H. Ethan. She hadn't known his name, though his face had stayed with her for a week. Attached was a scanned, handwritten letter, just one page. But each word settled in her like a quiet song. No crescendo, no drama. Just a steady, resonant note of something true. Mia, there are many reasons a company like ours chooses a candidate. Impressive resumes, outstanding achievements, exceptional skill. But sometimes the reason isn't written in any file. A rainy morning, a small gesture, an offer made without expectation. You did that, and it reminded me of a part of myself I'd nearly forgotten. When I was a student, uncertain, hoping someone would simply see me. I want you to know, you weren't. Chosen because I owed you something. You were chosen because I believe anyone who can be kind when no one asks them to be is someone who will know how to do the right thing when no one's watching. See you Monday. Ethan. She read the letter again and again, not to understand it more, but because each time revealed something else, a feeling she hadn't yet named, something soft, grounding. Enough to make her rise from the chair and begin preparing, not just for a first day, but for a different kind of path entirely. Her first day at Global Nova wasn't a celebration. There were no welcome balloons. No one rolled out a red carpet. No one knew she was the coffee girl. She was assigned to Team D14, a communications project group mid-crisis, high pressure, understaffed. Her team lead was a woman named Lila, precise, unsmiling, razor-focused. She didn't greet Mia with warmth, just handed over a stack of documents and said, "Deadline's Friday. If you need help, ask me, but try to solve it yourself first." Mia nodded. She didn't expect special treatment. Didn't want it. She started reading and making notes, researching. She didn't understand everything, but she didn't skip a line. At lunch, while others left for food, she stayed at her desk, eyes fixed on an old project board, trying to piece things together. A colleague passed by, glanced once, then moved on. No one there knew how deeply she had doubted herself before accepting the offer. No one knew what it had taken to step into that room. And no one knew that a single letter had been enough to make her believe she had the right to begin again on her own terms. That afternoon, Ethan passed the open office. He didn't step inside, just paused briefly at the glass wall where Mia sat, absorbed in a faded slide. He looked once, then walked on. She didn't see him, and maybe she didn't need to, because by then she was no longer the girl, sitting quietly in a corner cafe, unsure of her place in the world. She was here, part of something real, with real responsibilities and a real chance that hadn't arrived by luck. It had come from her, from how she had acted when no one was watching. And now someone had watched, and that was more than just a thank you. Her first days at Global Nova didn't unfold the way she had imagined. She had pictured herself gradually finding her footing, Someone would take her under their wing. She'd learn how to move with the rhythm of a leading tech company. But reality was sharper, less forgiving than the words in Ethan's letter, and certainly less like the kindness she thought she understood. By the second day, the workload had begun to climb. No one in Team D14 was unfriendly, just too consumed by their own meetings, dashboards, and looming deadlines to notice the new girl in the room. Everyone moved with practiced urgency, absorbed in their roles. She tried to match their pace, took notes fast, nodded when she wasn't sure, then stayed up past to fill in the blanks. She began waking up with dark circles under her eyes. There was no time to fuss with her hair or choose what to wear. Her beige crossbody bag grew heavier by the day, stuffed with scribbled post-its, hastily printed materials, and half-eaten snack bars she barely remembered putting in. A week later, she made her first mistake. She had been assigned a short draft for a trial campaign, something small, seemingly manageable. But under stress and unfamiliar with the internal systems, she accidentally published the unapproved content to the company's main channel. It stayed live for nearly 3 hours. Lila, the team lead, didn't raise her voice. She simply called Mia into the room, handed her an iPad showing client feedback metrics, and said in a low, even tone, "Next time, have someone review it." Even the small stuff. A small thing, but it landed like a slap. Mia apologized, bowed her head and left the room. No one followed. No one spoke. But inside she heard a chorus of whispers, words no one said but that she could hear as clearly as her own breath. "I don't belong here. They picked me out of sentiment. One mistake and they'll see I was never good enough." That evening, she stayed long after everyone else had gone. Most of the lights were off. A faint blue glow from her monitor lit the weariness in her face. She finished the corrected version of the draft, attached a report, hovered over the send button, but she didn't press it. Her fingers floated above the keys. Her eyes glazed. Then she let her head fall to the desk, not crying, not sighing, just still. And then her phone buzzed, a message from the last person she expected to hear from at this hour. Ethan H. Tran. The one who makes the first mistake is the one who's actually begun. No exclamation mark, no emoji. She read it 3 times. It felt like warmth moving quietly through a cold she had started to accept. She didn't reply. She just sat up, looked at the report again, checked every line, then this time she hit send. That night she left the office later than usual. The city had already gone quiet, but something in her had settled, not certainty, but maybe acceptance. She still wasn't sure she belonged here, still didn't fully understand why Ethan had chosen her. But she began to believe this. To understand the true worth of an opportunity, sometimes you have to walk through doubt and let it hurt. Back in her room, she hung up her coat, placed her laptop on the desk. She didn't open it, just sat quietly staring at the black screen, where her reflection floated faintly beneath the glow of a soft bedside lamp, a face not quite strong, but still here, still standing. And if you've ever stepped into a space where you felt far too small, you might have thought, this is a trap for dreamers. But maybe that trap was the first place you started becoming who you're meant to be. Things didn't suddenly become easier after that late-night message. The pressure was still there. The meetings still stacked one after another. Deadlines still carved into her lunch breaks, forcing her to eat quietly at her desk while her screen glowed with the next task. But something had shifted, not outside but within. She started arriving a little earlier each morning, not to prove anything but because early hours felt like the only time she could breathe before the world grew too loud. She brought along a small notebook, the same one she used years ago back when she worked part-time at the old bookstore, and once again, she began to write. Not because anyone asked her to, but because something inside her told her it mattered. The D14 project was entering its next phase, a test campaign aimed at one of the most overlooked audiences, elderly people living alone. Lila had presented a clean, structured proposal. It was technically sound and professionally composed, but it lacked something vital, feeling, During a team meeting, Lila asked, her voice level, eyes fixed nowhere in particular, if we wanted to make older people feel like they haven't been left behind, where would you start? Silence, as everyone was too focused on their screens. Or maybe they didn't know how to answer. From the end of the table, Mia raised her hand. A few heads turned, surprised. But Lila nodded. She said, maybe. We start by making them feel heard. No one spoke. Mia opened her notebook, tore out a small page and placed it on the table. On it were a few lines scribbled in simple handwriting. When I grow old, I hope someone still asks me about things unrelated to my health. I once loved someone deeply, but now, no one asks me about love anymore, she explained. I used to jot these down while working at the bookstore. Whenever an elderly person came in to buy a book, I'd ask what they'd been reading lately. Sometimes as they shared more than just a title. Still, no one said much. But someone across the table nodded, quietly. Lila picked up the slip, reread the lines, then she looked at Mia. What do you think we can turn this into? Mia didn't answer right away. But in her eyes something sparked, like light cutting through the thickest cloud of self-doubt. 3 days later, the idea was green-lit for trial. The project was titled, We Are Still Here. A series of videos and posts sharing short, real stories from older adults. No edits, no spin, no patronizing tone. Just words, just faces, just truth. Mia was no longer an assistant. She was given full editorial responsibility. Lila messaged her directly. This project needs someone who understands silence. I think you do. Mia worked through the weekend. She asked permission to call a few of the women she'd once served at the bookstore. Every story was recorded in the speaker's voice. No scripts. The first post went live the following Monday. Within an hour, it had more engagement than any content D14 had produced in the past 3 months. Comments poured in, young people tagging their parents and grandparents, older users leaving long, heartfelt replies, thanking the team, thanking her, thanking the world, perhaps, for remembering they still existed. Mia read every comment. Didn't like, didn't reply. Just read, as if they were letters from a faraway place she once belonged to. At Tuesday's morning meeting, Lila stood and gestured to pause the slide presentation midway. The We Are Still Here concept has been approved for full rollout, she said, voice steady. But her gaze lingered a moment longer on the young woman at the end of the table. Thank you, Mia. Mia looked up, not fully, just enough to see that the faces in the room had turned toward her. No one clapped. It wasn't needed. The air held just enough warmth to let her feel it. She wasn't a sentimental pick. Not a quiet favor extended out of guilt. Not just the girl who got a chance. She was someone who could create something that moved people. And in Lila's small nod, she saw it clearly. Yes, she had felt lost. Yes, she had doubted. She had walked into a world she believed wasn't built for her. But now, when the eyes of those who once didn't know her name now remembered it, she understood she belonged. A week after the We Are Still Here campaign was officially approved, Mia's life didn't change much on the surface. She still rode the bus to work, still ate the same simple breakfast sandwich, still wore the soft-soled shoes that had carried her through her junior year of college. But something had shifted, the way she saw herself. That morning, the city felt like it had just woken from a night of rain. The sunlight sifted gently through the trees, casting pale gold across damp sidewalks. She stepped off the bus earlier than usual, not for an appointment, just because that day she chose to turn down an old street, the same one she'd once passed with a very different heart. The cafe was still there, the weathered sign, the cracked window frame, the little bell that jingled softly when the door swung open. None of it had changed. Only she had, layered with a quiet growth that lived somewhere deep inside. She walked in. The smell of coffee mingled with wood and moisture so familiar it made her chest tighten. The furniture was the same, a new barista behind the counter. The old owner no longer there. She sat near the window, the spot where she'd once stood behind a man on a rainy morning. She ordered a cappuccino, opened her laptop, but didn't turn it on. She just sat, still, as if waiting for something. Unnamed. And then it came a Tuskand, a teenage boy, maybe 17 or 18, walked in. His school uniform was wrinkled, shirt untucked. He ordered a to-go coffee, reached into his wallet and hesitated. His eyes darted around, a flicker of embarrassment, a quiet shuffle of worry. No one noticed. The barista began to look unsure. Mia stood. She stepped to the counter and gently placed a bill on the counter. "He's probably late for school," she said with a soft smile. "Let me get this." The boy turned wide-eyed, just like the man that morning, not because someone helped him, but because he couldn't understand why a stranger would. "I don't know you," he murmured. Mia nodded. "I know." She left the cafe right after. No explanation, no waiting for thanks. Outside, the sky had cleared. Rain clung to the glass awnings above, catching the light like scattered flecks of sun. That evening, she sat at her desk. Again. Her inbox held a thank you message from the content research team. Positive feedback on her idea was spreading to other departments. She read it, smiled, then shut the laptop. The room light stayed on, but her heart was as still as a lake after wind. She pulled a card from the drawer and wrote in small, careful letters, "Mia L." Someone once helped by a person who never needed her name. She slipped it into her wallet, not to remember but to remind herself, if someone once believed she was worthy, then she had every right to pass that belief on, because sometimes what we do isn't just a gesture, it's a continuation of something kind, quiet, and exactly on time. Thank you for walking this story with us. If there was a moment that made you pause even for just a second, then maybe kindness is still alive in you. We hope you'll stay close for more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next quiet light. Thank you for staying until the end.